Thank you, Barry. Thank you, all of you. Merci. Mes chers amis, comme vous le savez peut-être, j'ai passé 5 ans à enseigner le français ici à Vancouver, alors je suis bien conscient des défis que vivent francophones et francophiles qui à célébrer assez notre belle langue dans cette région magnifique. Donc, je suis très content d'être de retour, surtout entouré par tant d'amis francophones aujourd'hui. It's great to be back in Vancouver. My roots here run deep. My family has been in BC for more than 100 years. My great-grandfather, James George Sinclair, came to Vancouver from Scotland more than a century ago with my 2-year-old grandfather, Jimmy Sinclair. Now, Jimmy would grow up to become one of the only members of Parliament in the world to serve on active duty in World War II in the RCAF, and would go on to become a cabinet minister, but would remain a passionate defender of British Columbia all his life. But the way they got here is a story worth telling. See, James George was a school teacher from a long line of school teachers, but he was also an angler. Twice he was caught fishing for salmon in the Nobleman's Creek by the local sheriff. See, the sheriff, though, liked James Sinclair, but he had to tell him if he caught him fishing a 3rd time in the creek, he'd have to throw him in jail. James's response? But if I canna fish, I canna live. So my great-granddad went home to his family, which included their bright little boy, Jimmy, who was just a little younger at the time than my daughter Ella Grace is now. And like many thousands of Scots, our Sinclair ancestor made the painful decision to leave his home, his community, and his country. He pulled out one of his school teacher's maps and told his family, "We are going where the fish are plentiful and where no nobleman owns them, the west coast of Canada." And they did. And what's remarkable about this story is just how unremarkable it is. A variation on the same tale has been lived out time and time again throughout this country's history. Individuals and families coming to this land with a dream of building a better life here for themselves than they ever could have for their children back home. But what these generations of people who continue to come and enrich our country built was far greater than just a future for their family. Because of the geography, the weather, the sheer scale of this country required that folks of all places and backgrounds pull together to build vibrant communities. The strength of this country is that we have become a place that is strong not in spite of our differences, but because of them. And all of you gathered here are at the center of these communities. Your hard work serving fellow citizens with a deep conviction that service matters is an essential part of what makes this magnificent project of a country so great. So let me start by saying something off the top that I know you don't hear enough. Merci. Merci pour votre dévouement à vos communautés, à vos commettants et à votre pays. Thank you for your countless hours of tireless service. Thank you for the phone calls you return, the events you attend, and the time you put in, often kept late away from those at home you care about. Most of all, thank you for the work you do to build the many communities from the largest to the smallest that make Canada the best country on the face of this earth. But let's also be frank. This past while has not been an easy time to be in our line of work. We have the Charbonneau Commission in my hometown in Montreal. We have the ethics breaches tumbling out of the Prime Minister's office. And we have whatever it is that's happening in the City Hall of Toronto. And all the latest headlines simply add to Canadians' already heightened sense of skepticism about those of us who choose to serve in public office. If left unchecked, it will turn into a wet blanket of cynicism that Canadians will throw over all of us, regardless of the party we belong to, the order of government we represent, or the political philosophy we espouse. In my view, the only antidote to all of this is to be transparent and accountable for our words, our beliefs, and most of all, our actions. It has been a long time since the great American Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis called sunlight the best of disinfectants, but it's as true today as it ever was. It is in that spirit that I sought the leadership of my party, and it is in that spirit that I will work hard to earn the trust of Canadians across this country. We owe a duty to Canadians to treat them as adults, to be forthright about our views and why we hold them, even, maybe even especially, when they might be unpopular with some people. So let me start with a case in point. Last week in Montreal, I was asked how I felt about the scandal facing the Prime Minister and what it all meant for Senate reform. I said, as I always do, what I believe to be true. I said that those who are preaching wholesale Senate reform as a response to the scandal in the Prime Minister's office are trying to both pander and trying to distract. After all, they know, or ought to know, that major reforms like creating a Triple-E Senate or abolishing it outright would require protracted constitutional discussions with the provinces. I also said, and this was not reported, that nobody, including myself, who has watched the goings-on in the Senate over the past year, could possibly support the status quo. Now, the third thing I said was widely reported, and it leads to a confession, one that of a deep, dark secret that apparently my political opponents think they can use against me. I'm a Quebecer. When I am in the presence of other Quebecers, I will often use the pronoun we. But what I said then was a statement of fact. Quebec, like Ontario, has 24 Senate seats to Alberta's 6. That is to Quebec's advantage, and Ontario's, I might add. That's not an opinion. It's a statement of constitutional fact. So it stands to reason that abolishing the Senate would disadvantage the East, just as electing and therefore empowering the current Senate would disadvantage the West. More to the point, I believe that opening up the Constitution to fix the Senate would be a disadvantage to everybody. We would have a fruitless round of negotiations that would end in acrimony and distract from the very real challenges our country faces. And I hold it as example the experience that the FCM went through, and you shared that lesson well in your report on Friday, so I'm going to read from it. In September 1991, after a decade of pursuing the constitutionalization of municipalities, the FCM Board of Directors unanimously agreed to a fundamental shift in strategy. They moved to a pragmatic focus on what was possible and ended the search for the brass ring, ushering in 20 years of advocacy success. Well, I'm looking forward to sharing in that pragmatic focus with you to face down all our challenges together. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been at the forefront in highlighting these challenges for years, too often to minimal response from Ottawa. How do we build a modern infrastructure, from wastewater to transit, that supports economic and population growth? How do we ensure that Canadians all have access to affordable housing? How do we make our communities, from the smallest outpost to the biggest city, the safest in the world? How can we ensure that Canadians in our most rural communities can build strong futures for their families so our kids don't have to leave? How do we make sure that all orders of government have both the revenues and the revenue sources we need to fulfill our responsibilities to Canadians? I've been on the job as leader for about a month and a half. It's just the beginning for me, and I'm really looking forward to working hard with all of you. First, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do want to share with you my four-point approach to solving these and other problems. First, I believe in cooperative and collaborative federalism. I am, in a phrase, a Laurier liberal. I believe that this country's great strength is our diversity, and not just our remarkable ethno-cultural diversity, of which we should be fiercely proud, but we should be just as proud of the diversity of our communities and our regions. Proud of the fact that our system is open and flexible, so that solutions developed in one community can be adapted and spread to communities across the country. Second, and related to the first point, I do not believe that the federal government should take a one-size-fits-all or top-down approach to policy. Sure, the federal government, as the order of government responsible for the national interest, ought to set national objectives. Those objectives should be both critically important and small in number. I set one in the leadership campaign, where I said Canada should have a national target for post-secondary education attainment. But I know that the way that those objectives get met will differ from region to region, from community to community. What works in Val d'Or probably won't work in Winnipeg, and what we need to work together to build a federalist system that recognizes that fact. Third, I believe in partnership. I've said many times over the past year that Canadians don't just want a different government, they want a better government. For me, that means a government that doesn't just talk a good game, but actually follows up with meaningful action. See, real change doesn't come from an announcement made in Ottawa. It happens when true partnerships that work for Canadians are created across orders of government. Here's an important example. We Liberals are proud that the Conservatives have adopted, at least in word, if not in deed, a liberal immigration policy. But that policy won't deliver its maximum positive benefit to communities if communities don't have the capacity to help newcomers settle once they get here. And this relates to the fourth and final point, which is the most important. We all serve the same people. It seems simple and obvious, but it's far too often forgotten. We all have important work to do. It's easy to get caught up in the relationship between different orders of government and the rules of engagement between us. But it's critically important that we always, in every case, understand that Canadians don't see things that way. Canadians want to know that we are working together to look out for their interests and to help them solve their problems. Now, for me, the biggest of those problems is the fact that middle-class Canadians have not had a decent raise in a generation. Over the past 30 years, the Canadian economy has more than doubled in size, grown over 100%. But middle-class incomes, median family incomes, has risen only 13%. And because of that, anxiety is growing. Middle-class Canadians are worried that progress, that core Canadian ideal, is under very real threat. Pour la première fois, les Canadiens doutent qu'ils vont laisser à leurs enfants un monde meilleur que celui qu'ils ont hérité de leurs parents. Et ça devrait nous préoccuper tous. Some people look at this and say, that's just the way it is. It's a big, bad, globalized world out there. They reason that we Canadians are minor players in that world on the receiving end of larger forces beyond our control. They say that a struggling middle class is a fact of 21st century life that we're just going to have to get used to. Well, to those people, I say simply, that's not good enough. They may be right about the global trend, But if any country can buck it, it's Canada. No country has what we have: the natural resource wealth, the depth and breadth of skills, the openness to immigration and investment, the opportunities to trade. But these days, Canadians are anxious because when asked, even though we sense that our country as a whole may be doing well, we can't help but feel as individuals, as families, and even as communities, we're struggling. And that anxiety is its own problem. You see, the extraordinary growth in one generation was created largely by a broadly supported economic agenda. Governments of all political stripes have been elected and re-elected here in Canada and elsewhere on a similar platform: resource development, openness to trade, fiscal discipline, tax competitiveness, and investment in skills, research, and infrastructure. Hard-working, middle-class Canadians supported this agenda because they were promised it would create prosperity for them. The basic bargain was simple: growth is good for you, and you will share fairly in its fruits. But that simply has not happened. This is not a political argument, it's a fact. The only thing middle-class Canadians have seen grow at a rate approaching GDP is household debt. Now, business, political, and community leaders should draw an urgent conclusion from all this. If we do not solve this problem, the anxiety that is out there will only increase. And eventually, inevitably, Canadians will stop supporting a growth agenda. And we will all be worse off as a consequence. Because the equality of opportunity, the promise of upward mobility, the chance at success and a better future for our kids is the premise, the promise upon which Canada was built. And the fact that too many Canadians feel it is more likely that they will fall out of the middle class into poverty rather than rise out of poverty into the middle class undercuts all we have achieved so far. This is more than just an economic problem. As middle-class Canadians grow more anxious, it becomes harder and harder to solve every other problem we face as a country. So we turn inward. We grow cynical and more fearful. We become easy prey to the politics of division. And we cease to believe that together we can actually build the kind of future that the hope and hard work of our ancestors built for us. So we, all of us, will be judged by the quality of our response to this central challenge. We will either give new life to the Canadian ideal that progress is always possible, or we will be judged by future generations as having been unequal to the task. I, for one, am for succeeding. I am optimistic enough to know that better is always possible in this of all countries. So I hope that each of you will take this as an open invitation, whatever your political affiliation, to help shape our platform for 2015 and for the future of this great country. Because I need and value your help. Thank you for all you do. Miss.
So we have a few minutes for a Q&A session with Mr. Trudeau. You know the drill. Our microphones are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, anyway, So number 2, as the first person I've spotted.
Thank you very much, Victor in District of Saanich. I'm going to repeat a question I asked of Elizabeth May. And most certainly the issue of progress for the middle class is a critical one. But we face a global challenge that has the potential to reduce the global GDP by 20 to 40%. We face a global challenge that has the potential to create social problems, refugees and others, beyond anything we can imagine or have ever seen. And that, of course, is climate change. So my hope would be, my expectation would be from the Liberal Party that we would see a comprehensive approach to how we are going to remake, in terms of transformational change, our society to deal with that overarching problem that threatens the very spaceship that we ultimately depend upon for everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. It's one that obviously preoccupies both me and many, many Canadians. I think the big element of change that we have to face is that we no longer can pretend that there's a choice to be made between what's good for the economy and what's good for the environment. We still have certain political parties that camp themselves firmly on one side or the other. But you cannot pretend that something could be good for the economy and bad for the environment and actually be good for the economy, except in the narrowest of parameters or the shortest of time frame. We need to make sure that our economic activity is sustainable in the long term. It reduces waste, reduces inefficiencies and pollution, doesn't externalize too many costs, and that requires a deep shift in our approach. And Mr. Harper's approach of focusing single-mindedly on the economy and not worrying about the environment has actually prevented the kind of economic innovation and growth that we need to see as a country. And there are a number of examples of that. But for me, there is no way to grow except sustainably, responsibly, and in balance with this planet that provides for everything we have. Merci.
Microphone number 3, and we are very pressed for time, so please, if you can make your questions as direct as possible.
And my answer's short, too. I get it.
Ryan Young with the City of St. Anne de Bellevue, City Councillor. I guess it's more on the same issue, but I seem to feel that there's a bit of a paradox in your philosophy where you say that, you know, as a country we've been addicted to growth and that this hasn't really done anything for the middle class, but at the same time you support Chinese investment in the oil sands, and this is a country obviously addicted to growth. And I think that many people, commentators have said that this is more of the same addiction to growth. Let's liquidate the oil sands as fast as we possibly can, and somehow this is going to be good for the middle class in Canada. I think there's a bit of a paradox in your philosophy.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. But no, I don't see a paradox at all. Obviously, there are different kinds of growth. There's the rampant single bottom line, short-term quarterly reports approach to growth that we have seen as being particularly devastating. But when we understand that export-intensive industries pay on average 50% higher wages to middle-class Canadians than non-export intensive industries, we understand that we do need to trade. We are too small a country in population with too many resources to be able to go it alone. We've defined our growth through the 20th century with the prosperity that came through our relationship with our biggest trading partner, the United States. We now have to engage with where the centers of strength and resource and economic action are going to be, and that means moving west. Further west, so far west you're going east. But we need to do that responsibly, and we have to keep our handle on that. We can't sort of backslide into it. We have to have a clear direction, and that's where I differ from both Mr. Harper and Mr. Mulcair in my approach. We need a logical, strong, sustainable approach to foreign investment, to trade, that's going to set the terms for the future for the next 20 years for Canada. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Trudeau. I'm terribly sorry. I know there are people at the microphones, but our time is up. Mr. Trudeau has other engagements, and we also have to move on to our our agenda for today. So please, my apologies. Barry Urbanovich is here to thank our speaker.
You can always reach me at justin.ca as well.